Hey, good morning, everybody. How's it going? It's a beautiful 36 degrees here in Colorado Springs. I just started this YouTube channel and I wanted to record some content. I want to go more in depth in the future. This is just a very brief overview. It's more of an introduction video. I'm starting this newscap channel because I feel like the news doesn't do an accurate job of pushing the most important stories I feel are important to everyday life or that people should be more aware of. A lot of those things include foreign policy, domestic COVID issues, international COVID issues. Well, quite frankly, I don't even fucking care about COVID, but I feel like it's such a big issue in society today that I can't ignore that issue. I'm also creating this channel because my wife doesn't care about what I tell her about the news. So if anybody's out there and their wife doesn't want to hear about what's going on all that often and you need an outlet, this is the channel for you. So who is this channel for? This channel is for people who have an interest in news, politics, foreign policy, but they don't trust the news to get them accurate, timely information, or they feel like there's too much propaganda in today's news. Propaganda is not solutions to issues. I'm going to try to stay politically neutral. You know, I want to approach things from a logical perspective that makes sense and that are relevant and that aren't from a political position where I'm automatically writing off what the situation is or what's going on in the situation, right? I mean, I feel like that's why the news media is having a lot of the problems they are today. So most importantly, I just want to enjoy the journey of starting this YouTube channel. I want to enjoy the journey and encourage people to get more active in politics or just more aware of what's going on in the world in general. So now if you guys want to hear some more or different topics, you know, the stock market, state issues, federal issues, anything that you guys feel is relevant and worthy of a news story, leave it in the comment section and I will get around to it. And if it's a big story or I feel like it's a pressing issue, I will include it in the next video and do some more analysis on that. So nothing's really off limits. Obviously, I'm just grabbing sources off the internet and doing some cross-referencing and all that stuff. But I will try to snag every bit of information from all corners of the internet and combine them and report them to you guys on a weekly basis. So it's my belief that I should be able to live my life the way I feel is best for me, right? So just, you know, I want the government to leave me alone. I want people to leave me alone and let me figure out what is best for me, because ultimately it's my life and I figure I know what's best for me, right? And so we can all live in peace and harmony until you start telling me how do I live my life or what I should do about things that don't affect you personally, right? I feel like that's super relatable. I feel like a lot of people believe that as well. And I feel like if we just get back to that and allowing people to do what they feel is best for them in every situation, we'd be set. We wouldn't have any of these domestic issues that we see today. So yeah, without further ado, that brings me to the sponsor of this video. It's not Corona. I'm not sponsored, but I drink so many Coronas that I think Corona should sponsor me on this. Who knows? One can only hope and try, you know. So these are the top 5 news stories from this week that I feel like are most important. And the first one is probably the best news. That is CNN's viewership plummets 90% from last year. So according to the Daily Mail, CNN's viewership is down 90% from last year in both overall audience and an advertising coveted 25 to 54 age demographic. So they had a significant drop between the first week of the new year this year and compared to 2021. This year, 2022, CNN averaged just above 548,000 viewers during the week of January 3rd, a drop of nearly 2.7 million viewers in the same week last year. CNN also saw an 86% decline in much desirable 25 to 54 age demographic, with 113,000 people tuning in last week, compared to 822,000 1 year ago. So the large decline is likely due to all the big name scandals, you know, between Chris Cuomo, Don Lemon, senior producer, what's his name? John Griffin, I believe. John Griffin was arrested by the FBI involving sex crimes with children. So that man's a literal pedophile. So both Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon both face sexual assault accusations or sexual harassment accusations, towards the later part of the year. Chris Cuomo was fired for trying to help his brother, Andrew Cuomo, former governor of New York, cover up his accusations. So in comparison, how does CNN stack up to their competition, Fox News, MSNBC? So in comparison, Fox News dropped about 15%, averaging 1.4 million viewers the first week of the new year. MSNBC lost 67% of its total audience last week, with an 80% coming from their key demographic. So why is this happening? And I think it's because a lot of people are starting to tune out the news. They're starting to realize that it's all propaganda being pushed on us, trying to divide us as Americans. And largely, the news media is out of touch with what everyday Americans who go to work, make a living, want to provide for their family, and overall just want to be left alone. And I think a lot of people are turning into YouTube videos or podcasts. You know, Joe Rogan, the Rogan Experience is having tremendous success. He's the #1 podcast in the world in 2021. Spotify really lucked out with that. But I think a lot of talking heads, you know, just like how we are, me and talking to the viewers, is taking the place of mainstream media. I'm all here for it. You know, I love that because hopefully that'll bring back some integrity into journalism and not just viewership and news ratings, because clearly across the board, mainstream media is taking a hit. So that's positive. That's good news. And so that will move us into number 2 of the most important news article of the week. New York now allows 800,000 non-citizens to vote in local elections. Now, the mainstream news media made it seem like these are illegal immigrants who are voting, but upon further research, that's not the case. Non-citizens include people here on work permits or who are green card holders, and they have access to the ballot box. They could vote in municipal elections as early as 2023. One requirement is that they are legal residents of the city for at least 30 days, which in my opinion is kind of low. It seems kind of unfair. Would I say unfair? Maybe not unfair, but a point of contention with people that can come into the country, be here for 30 days, and then automatically affect the democratic process. So New York City is the first major city in the United States to grant widespread municipal voting rights to non-citizens. So Arizona, Alabama, Colorado, and Florida have adopted rules that would preempt any attempts to pass laws in their states that, like the one passed in New York City. Reporters say that immigrants who reside in the city legally, pay taxes, send their children to public schools, rely on city services should have a say in who becomes mayor and who represents them on the city council. And you know what? That's a great point for the supporters. I have to agree. If the city is willing to take taxpayer money from non-citizens, they do have a seat at the table, because my argument would be, well, if you're taking my taxes, I should have, you know, a seat at the table and talk about how the democratic process works or who I want to lead me. And I think that's a very conservative approach, right? If the city wants the money, well, you got to give a spot to sit. Opponents of the bill say that this weakens the voting rights of citizens and discourages immigrants from seeking U.S. citizenship. Former Mayor Bill de Blasio had a similar concern. He said that before leaving office, he would not veto the legislation, but expressed concern that the bill would undermine the value of citizenship if it dissuaded residents from wanting to become a citizen. Now, I agree that allowing non-citizens to vote definitely weakens. Well, it just takes away an extra benefit of becoming an American citizen, right? I don't think it would dissuade anybody that wants to become an American citizen, because obviously you get additional perks once you become a citizen. And so if you're here legally and you're working here and you have intentions of becoming a U.S. citizen, I don't think being allowed to vote in municipal elections would affect that overall goal. Now, the problem that I see arising from this is that I think that it will be expanded to include that will basically include illegal immigrants and not just non-citizens who are here with a green card or a working visa. They can't vote for presidents or state governors or federal congressmen and all that stuff. It's just local. But the problem with this is that it opens the door to allow them to vote in those more important elections that decide more things federally and affect all the states in general. And whoever says that this won't open the door for that, please, okay? It always does. It always does, right? You give an inch, then they try to take a mile. So city council legal staff determined that there was no federal or state laws that bars New York City from expanding the right to vote in their local elections. That being said, it is open for legal challenge, and it is likely to be challenged from, from maybe the state legislatures and whatnot. Now, in my opinion, I think New York probably should have gone through the state and asked them for guidance, because ultimately states' rights trump, local governments like New York City's governments. And if they wanted to play ball and be cooperative with the state, they would have probably tried to push it up there and then save time and money and the legal recourse and all that. But that's not what they chose. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in court. Keep an eye out on that. So of the 800,000 legal non-citizens in New York, 130,000 are from the Dominican Republic and 117,500 are from China. That's all the information I could find out about who these people are that are voting. They're allowing this to happen. And, California and New York especially, I don't want to ever live there. I don't know why people live there. Way too many people, way too much big government. But we get to see what happens and how it plays out, how it works for them. A lot of the times their experiments don't pay out in the long run. Apart from that, I wouldn't want to see it implemented anywhere else in the United States. I know Vermont and Maryland both have similar legislation that's being challenged in the courts right now. So if you want more information about that, I will leave all the links that I use or that I looked at in the description, and you can go from there. You can keep up on your own. So the third important news article that came out this week is the dreaded COVID, okay? I'm not going to talk about the Supreme Court ruling. I think that's being pushed around by enough social media, news media, talking heads, whatever. We're going to skip that. You guys can go check that out. But this one deals with Quebec's plan to tax unvaccinated Canadians. That's something that we've all been concerned with from day one, that the unvaccinated would become the discriminatory class of people that is legally discriminated against. So we've just spent the last half century trying to eliminate discrimination, and now the whole argument with vax and unvaccinated, well, now it's opening the doors for legal discrimination. And in places like Quebec and other places that I got named here, they are actually discriminating against the unvaccinated, and it's being okayed and encouraged by their judicial system and by their governments. So in my eyes, that's a tyrannical government, and it shouldn't be allowed. We have individual liberties in the United States. We have the freedom of choice, and we have to make sure that we keep those intact, because that's the foundation of our government, right? Of our constitutional republic. So let's get into it. NPR says Quebec's unvaccinated tax has people rushing to get vaccinated. That's a horrible incentive. You're going to penalize people financially for not getting vaccinated, and you're scaring people to go get vaccinated, okay? So health officials say their plans to put a significant health tax on unvaccinated people, who account for the large share of COVID hospitalizations, quickly drove a rush of new appointments this week. According to Quebec's premier, I think that's how you say it, Francis Legault. I apologize if I butchered that name. I don't know how the Canadians pronounce names. But according to him, only 10% of Quebec's population is unvaccinated, but they're making up 50% of hospitalizations. So I'm a big data person. I would have liked to see who makes up the next 50%, or what is the rehospitalization rate of unvaccinated and vaccinated personnel, right? So this could be that the one-time hospitalization of people who are unvaccinated and then they just never come back in, which is a possibility. I wonder what the reinfection rate of COVID vaccinated people are, because this one statistic doesn't paint a whole picture for me. 10% and they're overrepresented in hospitals, that's a thing. Whew. So even though there's only 10% of the Quebec's population that are unvaccinated, the government's saying that's too many unvaccinated people, and they are penalizing these people. So another strategy to boost vaccination rates in Quebec include requiring people to carry a passport for those who want to visit a cannabis store or a liquor store. So that's kind of unique. Why would they only require a passport for those places? Usually if you're going to do the whole passport vaccination, proof of vaccination, you're going to apply that to everything in society. You're going to try to push these people in a corner, and that's kind of what we're seeing in New York. Thankfully, people are pushing back, but in Australia as well, I believe. Another incentive, and this one is just as horrible. So this one actually affects your family directly. So a judge recently issued a temporary suspension of a father's visitation rights to his child because he isn't vaccinated. So this judge literally decided that it was a good idea to not allow this father to see his child because he's unvaccinated. Now, I wonder, I didn't read any more information on that case specifically. I didn't see if the mother requested that the father not be able to see his child, or I'm not sure how that came to light. But that's just another thing to look into. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was asked about the plan, and he said it was too early to comment on. So he's clearly waiting for more information before he takes it public, and basically he has to field questions, tough questions about this. Canadian province to impose significant fines on the unvaccinated residents. Premier Francis Legault said he believes that refusing to get vaccinated leads to consequences for the healthcare system. So this is the argument that I've heard in the United States about unhealthy people basically representing a lot of hospitalizations, right? So everybody knows that being unhealthy, smoking, drinking alcohol, being physically unfit, being obese, that they have health consequences attached to higher hospitalization rates, right? Heart disease is the #1 killer in the United States, and it's, I think, the top 4 or 5 for Americans. Now, Canada is saying that there's health consequences for the healthcare system. Well, yeah, clearly, everything has a cause and effect, but to say that COVID is specifically enough of a reason to impose a higher tax on the unvaccinated as opposed to unhealthy obesity and substance abuse or whatever it may be that, you know, results in you going to the hospital, we get labeled as fat shaming people for who are unhealthy and who, you know, we tell that they need to lose weight or there's going to be health consequences. Well, now we can't even do that in America, but it seems that it's okay to tax or raise their healthcare costs of people who choose not to get vaccinated. So if you take the same logic and try to apply it to people who are willfully obese or who willfully, engage in activities that are going to lower their life expectancy due to health and heart problems or liver problems or whatever it may be, people would argue that it's their freedom of choice to indulge in those behaviors. And I would say it's the same thing. If you don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. That's on you. The vaccinated should be protected by the vaccine. But clearly in January of 2022, we're seeing that people who get vaccinated they're subject to reinfection, I should say. I'm sorry. So Canada isn't the only place that's doing this. In Greece, those over 60 have until January 16th, so until tomorrow, to get their first shots, or they're going to be fined €100 or $113 every month if they remain unvaccinated. So that's over $1,356 a year if you choose to remain unvaccinated. I hate that, because now you're taking money out of people's pockets in their families and asking them to conform to something that they don't initially choose to, right? And that's pushing people to a corner. That's discrimination, right? In Austria, the health minister announced last month the government plans to impose fines of up to €3,600 or $4,000 on people who skirt around the vaccine mandates set to be introduced in early February for all residents 14 years and above. So now it's a little more hefty. Again, I don't know how that would go over here in America, but we'll see how it plays out in Austria, Greece, and now Canada. Obviously, I didn't include anything about Australia, but they are pushing back against the government who is limiting their freedom to move. I'm not sure if they're enforcing any financial penalties for those unvaccinated, but I'll look into that. So that takes us to number 4. First, I have to have a little drink. All right, 4th is Iran releases video depicting assassination of Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So everybody knows Iran is the propaganda master. They say a lot of rhetoric. They make empty threats. In 2016, I would say that Iran wouldn't cross a line that they didn't feel comfortable crossing because there would have been consequences, right? And before that, I'm not sure the same could be said. Everybody remembers Obama saying this is the line that you don't cross in the sand, and multiple times foreign adversaries would cross that line with no repercussions. But this is kind of a potentially serious situation, right? You have a former American president and now average American citizen being targeted by a foreign adversary on American soil, depicting an assassination of him at his property at Mar-a-Lago. So despite how you feel about Trump, whether you like him or not, this has serious implications, because if, say, they do assassinate Trump and it's on American soil, well, that's an act of war, and I hope that the government would react accordingly. So let's see. The website of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei released a simulated assassination strike of former President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago in retaliation for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So if everybody remembers, Soleimani was killed in a drone strike in Baghdad in January 2020. Soleimani was an architect in Iranian policy in the Middle East. He was responsible for providing guidance, funding, intelligence, and logistical support for their allies, which included Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, which is arguably the most active and well-recognized terrorist cells in the world at the moment. So the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, Brigadier General Kwani threatened last week that Iran would seek revenge for Soleimani's death and that it would happen within the United States. Quote, "We will prepare ground for hard revenge against the U.S. from within their homes, as we do not need to be present as supervisors everywhere. Wherever is necessary, we take revenge against Americans by the help of people on their side within their homes without our presence." Well, there you have it. He's going to rely on homegrown terrorism to cause destruction here in the United States, which is why I hope the FBI has gotten it together and has a list of people who have been doing suspicious activity, because everybody knows time after time the FBI has dropped the ball on protecting Americans until it's too late, despite having intelligence on who is a problem actor and what they're planning to do. I mean, the Boston bombing brothers are an example. The couple over in, San Bernardino a couple years ago, that was an intelligence failure as well. And I mean, the list goes on. The FBI has been dropping the ball lately. Iranian president is calling upon the world to hold Trump and allies, including Israel, accountable. Quote, "Muslims will take our martyrs' revenge," end quote. He's calling for them to be tried and judged. He's calling for them to be tried and judged under Islamic law of retribution. So under Iran's Islamic law, a convicted murderer can be executed unless the family of the victim agree to take blood money through a reconciliation. So I obviously don't think that Trump or Israelis or any of the top aides under Trump's administration are going to be tried under Islamic law in Iran. And I think it's unlikely that Trump aides in Israel would be tried internationally, because Iran has a habit of funding terrorism across the world. And Soleimani was in Baghdad, likely engaged in some not so saintly activities. So we'll see if Iran actually has any intention of following through on their word. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The press secretary, Jen Psaki, was asked about it, and she said that she's not going to discuss intelligence on the podium, but that Iran's threats are basically problematic. So she at least acknowledged that it was unacceptable, and we'll see if Iran has the balls to do it. I mean, attacking any American on American soil is ballsy, and I don't think that any nation can currently do that without being obliterated, quite frankly. Yeah, so that's something to keep on your radar. The fifth and final article from the week came just yesterday or 2 days ago, and it's Russia refuses to rule out sending military forces to Latin America amid escalation with the United States. So the United States, NATO allies, and Russian leadership had to sit down, and they were trying to figure out how to de-escalate the situation in the Ukraine, right? So if you know, Russia has been amassing thousands and tens of thousands of troops along the Ukrainian border. And their argument is that the United States and NATO allies are trying to get too close to their borders, right? So they're trying to incorporate the Ukraine into NATO, Georgia. And if you remember, if you are familiar, in 2008, Georgia and Russia went to an 8-day war where the Georgian army was just obliterated, right? And that was sending a message that NATO needed to back up off of Russia's border, right? And from a logical perspective, I can totally see and understand why Putin is upset. Look what happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union started moving into Cuba, and the United States was frantic, and we weren't going to allow that to happen. Now imagine Russia's perspective, where they don't want NATO creeping up in the Ukraine, into Georgia, right on their borders, and really cramping Russia down. I mean, one of the leaders in Russia said that we have nowhere to retreat to, that Russia has nowhere to retreat to. And from an American perspective, I think getting the Ukraine and Georgia on, NATO's side is great. Now, I have questions about whether or not we'll be able to defend them, like the NATO alliance. An attack on one is an attack on all. I wonder if we'll actually have the capacity, resources, and willingness to protect those countries that are right there next to Russia and on the other side of the world for us. But it's an obligation that we have undertaken. I don't see how this situation is going to play out. Crimea obviously was, invaded under sketchy pretenses of Putin. And I guess United States intelligence just yesterday had intel that Russia was amassing a self-inflicted pretext to war, to where they're going to pre-stage military personnel to bomb Russian or pro-Russian areas. It's basically to set up a pretense to an invasion, to invade the Ukraine and protect ethnic Russians. So Putin is playing chess, and hopefully the rest of the world and NATO aren't playing checkers. Putin is tremendously smart, former KGB. So I don't know. I don't know. I've been studying Putin for a few years now, and all I know is that he's playing chess and playing the long game and is relying on NATO to fall apart or overstep or something. So we have to be careful playing with Putin. So obviously, if Russia is not ruling out sending military personnel to Latin America, that is an escalation of tensions with the world. That is their military personnel coming tremendously closer to the United States. It's a cause for concern. They want to send them to Venezuela and Cuba. Obviously, Venezuela has their own problems, and Russia would be a hand to grab onto from their perspective, I imagine. That's interesting. I assume that if the United States is unwilling to no longer include the Ukraine in the NATO alliance, that Russia would probably chill out, and they would probably still try to overtake the Ukraine. And I don't see the United States or NATO backing down from that strategic possibility, right, of bringing the Ukraine into NATO. So right now, I think there's going to be a standstill. But anytime negotiations fall through, it's a dangerous time for people that are involved over there. So yeah, we'll stand by, check that out, probably come back to it in a week or two. All right, guys, so that does it for this week's episode of the top 5 news articles of this week. If you guys thought this brought value to you, brought some information that you didn't realize or quite know about, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, guys. It would really help out. I appreciate it a lot. And just about finished the beer, so I guess I should tie up this video. Until next week, guys, have a good one. Stay safe.